Hi, everyone.
Hey there.
New background?
I'm in Seattle visiting our son.
Oh, nice.
The time of the meeting has arrived and you have a quorum.
Okay, won't waste any time. I want to call this special meeting of the Cambridge City Council to order. The call of the meeting is to discuss the charter assessment conducted by the Collins Center. The Governor's Executive Order issued on March 12, 2020 has authorized the use of remote participation at meetings of the city's public bodies in response to the threat posed to the public by the COVID-19 virus and has issued guidelines for the city's use of remote participation. In addition to having members of the council participate remotely, we've also set up Zoom teleconference for public comment. Please be aware that Zoom is primarily being used for public comment. In order to watch the meeting, please tune into channel 22 or visit the open meeting portal on the city's website. If you'd like to provide public comment, please visit the city council section of the city's webpage. Instructions for how to sign up to speak are posted there. Once you've completed the sign up procedure, you will receive a link to the Zoom meeting. We will not allow any additional public comment sign up after 12. First order of business is a roll call of members present.
Councilor Carlone.
Present and audible.
Present. Vice Mayor Mallon.
Present and audible.
Present. Councilor McGovern.
Present and audible.
Present. Councilor Nolan.
Present and audible.
Present. Councilor Simmons.
Present and audible.
Present. Councilor Sabrina Wheeler.
Present and audible.
Present. Councilor Toomey. Councilor Toomey. Absent. Councilor Zondervan.
Present and audible.
Present. Mayor Siddiqui.
Present.
There are 8 members present.
With that, all of today's votes will be by roll call. We'll welcome the Collins Center and Michael Ward for a presentation, and then we will go to public comment and then to discussion and questions. Michael?
Thank you, Mayor, members of the council. Good morning. If it's all right, I will screen share here with a presentation that we have got. Let me make sure I can get this. All right. Can people see that? Excellent. All right. Well, thank you so much again for the opportunity to meet with you today. We know there's a lot going on. We intend to keep our remarks relatively brief as we can, in order to allow the council as much time as possible to ask us questions and more importantly, perhaps to discuss amongst yourselves, what, if anything, the next steps you'd like to pursue are. So we're going to go through the process that that we got us here today, and we're going to go through very briefly, just the high points of the 2 memos that we have provided to the council. We know that that consideration of tackling something as big as a charter can seem daunting, even in normal times, and that these certainly aren't normal times. But we do think that it's an important step to take a serious look at the city's charter, at the city's constitution, effectively, which has remained virtually unchanged for about 80 years. As I think you know from our prior discussions and from the memos, it is now best practice or common practice for municipal charters to include a mandated review. And just, you may already be aware of this, but just in case, there's a lot of charter review activity going on right around Cambridge right now. We are currently working with Somerville and Watertown on charter reviews. We had been working with Winthrop. They're paused. They'll probably pick it up again soon. Chelsea, within the last year, reviewed its charter. Medford is moving towards one. Everett did one in 2015 and has it again, and every year it ends in a 5. So there's a lot of charter review activity going on in Cambridge's neighborhood. We sort of, sometimes half jokingly say best practices once every decade, but for some municipalities, at least once a century is good practice to take a look at the charter. And so we're pleased to be able to do whatever we can to help the council consider what it wants to do potentially around your charter and your process. So to get going here, a quick summary of the process to date. So we met with the council, presented to you all and discussed with you all, I believe, back in late September, a little bit of background on charters. We then submitted a scope for a project through which we would provide two memos. And the first memo is an overview of the current charter of forms of government, some history and background of charters generally and of Cambridge specifically, and a look at some potential changes that could be undertaken. The second memo looked at potential areas of common interest among the council after meetings with individual meetings with councilors, and then attempts to construct some pathways to proceed. We signed that in February, delivered the first memo in March, the second memo in April, and then now here we are for this final presentation today. So very quickly just hitting the high points of Memo 1. As you know, Cambridge was a town, as were all Massachusetts municipalities for the first couple of centuries of its existence, then went through a variety, I think 3 different strong mayor forms over the course of about a century before adopting the Plan E form, the council manager form that you have today in 1940. These plan forms were available to municipalities from about 1915 through 1968, after which they could no longer be adopted. They were basically created by the state in that first half or middle part of the century to provide sort of templates that cities could use, and you would just essentially pick a template and use that as your charter. They're pretty minimalist and antiquated in their text compared to the charters that have been drafted over the last 10, 20, 30, 40 years. There are only 12 left that still have plan forms, and only 2, Cambridge and Lowell, have Plan E. Worcester has its a charter that it drafted modeled closely on Plan E, but it's not a plan form exactly. So where we've left off is Cambridge's charter has been with only a couple of very minor tweaks unchanged and unreviewed for about 80 years now. We went through in this memo some of the main reasons that you would want to look at and review charter, and certainly ensuring that the government is keeping pace with modern best practices is a critical one, as well as making sure it's keeping responsive to the needs and preferences of the current population as opposed to just the one when it was initially enacted, keeping it consistent with changes in state and federal law, keeping it consistent with changes in values, in how the text actually speaks to what needs to happen, what does happen, and then to clarify any text that causes confusion or disputes. The other thing we went through in the memo, if you're looking, what are the processes to a new charter? We quickly go through the 2 main processes. The first is a home rule charter, that process is spelled out in the Home Rule Amendment to the Constitution, and then in further detail in Chapter 43B. It operates through an elected charter commission. I'll talk once more about that a couple slides further on. The one that we are focusing on mostly here is special act route to a charter, which would be the same pathway that the council would follow to any home rule petition. It's a more flexible process. It does require legislative and gubernatorial approval, but that is the one that both of our options A and B, when we get to them, will utilize. And then finally, there is the process for charter revision, which basically it follows the home rule petition route. There are also within 43B, there are other mechanisms, but not going to get into that detail today. So now moving on to the second memo we provided, some very high level findings from our meetings with councilors. What did we hear? Well, we did hear there was strong interest for some kind of a charter review, although I think what that could look like differed. There was definitely strong interest in protecting the city's strengths, in particular not recognizing or not damaging a recruitment for a next city manager. We did not sense at the current moment on the current council a majority for considering a strong mayor at this point in time. And I would parenthetically say, a super majority for something as large as that would be certainly a stronger, certainly provided a stronger pathway to success. But at the same time, we did sense that it was not like that was closed forever. What we sensed was an interest in looking now in conjunction with the city manager recruitment process about ways to improve the current form of government, but leaving open the possibility if those improvements didn't achieve the desired outcomes in 5 to 10 years, then there certainly would be more interest in exploring a strong mayor. So that was how we interpreted and where the council stands on this key question. At the same time, there were a lot of areas of agreement, or if not universal, certainly near agreement that we sensed from council. So obviously the first, again, is doing no harm to the city's financial strength and other strengths. But we heard a common thread of providing the council stronger voice in appointments, particularly to boards and committees. We had heard a strong thread of interest in ensuring the council has the resources to perform its legislative duties. We heard strong interest in mechanisms for increasing the accountability in city government, as well as new mechanisms or looking at mechanisms and processes for how the council conveys its goals and priorities to the manager and to the executive. We heard some interest in providing council with more access to legal advice. We heard interest in reviewing the council composition. We didn't really sense a common thread about, X is the problem with the current council composition, but we certainly heard a lot of interest in examining, exploring, discussing, hearing from the public what may or may not be working about the current council composition and what are the alternatives. And then the final piece of there seemed to be nearly universal interest in making future reviews automatic. So what we've done, or what we did in the memo rather, and we'll very briefly summarize now, is provide two options here. And for these options, we really tried our best to satisfy a bunch of principles, and it's certainly challenging given everything going on in the world and the timelines. And so we recognize that these aren't perfect, but we've tried to give you two pathways that might get to some of the outcomes noted in the previous slide and in the memos. Again, the principles behind the options we provided: we try to avoid doing any harm to existing strengths, try to avoid doing harm to the manager recruitment. We know public input is extremely important everywhere. It's particularly so we know in Cambridge, so trying to make sure that there are adequate opportunities for public engagement during whatever process is followed is certainly important. And then again, trying to find a way so that there is an automatic next review, and it's not 5-10 years from now, some future council isn't trying to figure out what to do, when to do, that it's now built in. It's now part of the fabric of the city that there will be a review. Beyond the two options we'll talk about in a second, there's always this option C, which basically does not involve the council directly, does not involve the manager directly. This is the Charter Commission route I spoke about a couple slides back. At any point in time, as a reminder, residents could work to gather signatures. You would need 15% of the signatures of registered voters. If you got that, you could put the question on the ballot: should there be an elected charter commission? That elected charter commission obviously would include elected members and would be outside of, the control of the council or manager. This process is provided so that there is a way for residents, if they are unhappy with how things are and don't believe the current power structure is dealing with it, they can provide that option. We're not including that here because we were looking at options for the council to consider, but I did want to make it clear that there always is that opportunity for residents on their own to follow that option C. All right, so just the high points of the two options that we provided in the memo. The first is structured around putting a charter on the ballot, a new charter on the ballot in November 2023. The council would do that by the first step would be creating a charter advisory committee. And we suggested, again, to tie back to the recommendations we made earlier, and you can read more about this. One is not to consider strong mayor in this first review, but to note that it will be strongly encouraged consideration of strong mayor in the first review built into that new charter. This would allow it, again, that time to try out the improvements to the council manager form with a new manager in place for some time before then moving on to consider strong mayor if the challenges identified, the problems identified were not solved by the change. The other piece, of course, that's critical to it is mandating a review probably sometime in the 2027 to 2029 range. There'd be some, have to be some thinking about what the optimal year for that would be. The strengths of this approach is it does align with the city manager recruitment timeline. It provides the opportunity for the current council to start the work, but noting that because there's an election coming up, that it will be incumbent on the next council to really figure out where it goes from there. It does include opportunities for public engagement, but also doesn't push things out too far, and then it does keeps alive this potential down the road for changing to a strong mayor if the problems have not been solved by the initial improvements. As for cons, the way this is structured, really the whole thing rests on this November 2023 vote. If it didn't pass, then everything would be back to square one, and that a significant public education effort would be required between now and 2023, and knowing everything else going on in the world, that obviously is poses some level of challenge. So the second option we provide is take on a few either consensus or near consensus changes now, and then have a full review earlier than the other option, maybe 2026, something like that. And so again, the idea here would be to make a couple consensus changes now and leave some more significant changes for 2026, and items that could be potentially included in the current year, and the time is short. This would have to be done very quickly. Would be mandating the charter review every 10 years, providing potentially for the council to approve or reject certain appointments, providing for an annual review of the city manager by the council, things like that. Again, hopefully that there would be pretty wide agreement on council on, so that things could move relatively quickly. The positives, the pros for this, provides for these, near consensus items to be in place before a new manager begins. It locks in place future charter reviews. It does allow some public engagement, although minimal for some of these first pieces, but more for the larger ones. And again, it does keep alive the same as the first one, the strong mayor possibility further down the road. And then the cons, it pushes significant change out further than option A, potentially rushes a little bit, changes in 2021, and may potentially, have a dampening effect on more comprehensive charter change if folks just get, if there's some preponderance of people that say, no, okay, we solved the problem, we're done, that's it. So either way here, I think, and Steve and Marilyn, the others on our team who are on this by phone, can weigh in further if they want. I think what we do note, it's in the memo, we're not hiding it anywhere. We do think that the Plan E form is antiquated. We think it's obsolete for Cambridge's purposes, and at some point, whether it's some tweaks now and a full change in 2026, whether it's a full change in 2023, whether it's 10 years from now, at some point, Cambridge is going to need to move on and fully draft a fresh charter. So that's it. Our quick high level summary of the memos. We are again really appreciative of the opportunity to talk with you today. We're happy to answer any questions that you may have. And provide whatever help we can as you consider where to head from here. So thank you, Mayor.
Yeah, thank you so much, Mike, for the presentation. What we'll do now is we'll go to open public comment. I'll start. We have 3 speakers, and you'll have 3 minutes each. We'll start with Lee Ferris, followed by Robert Winters.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Great. I'm Lee Ferris. I live at 269 Norfolk Street, and I'm very happy that the council is considering charter reform, and I hope that the council goes forward with some form of charter reform now this year. Of the 2 options, speaking just for myself, that the Collins Center outlined, I am inclined towards option A with a charter advisory committee. And I like that it would have significant public input, and that it provides an opportunity both for the current council to begin work as well as the second council to do so. So that's where I hope the council will go. I think the areas of agreement that the Collins Center outlined about providing the council a stronger voice in appointments and more resources to perform its duties are really good points. And I particularly would like to see this process that gets created over the next year and a half or so address how to increase accountability in city government and the problem of both the long timelines of city response, as well as the sometimes just not following the city council's direction at all. And of course, we can cite the broadband issue as a key one of those examples. And I definitely think the council needs more access to legal advice so that you can tell whether the opinion coming from the solicitor is good advice or simply risk averse, or in fact might be made to reflect the manager's preference. I myself am less concerned about the current council composition. Out of all the things that we need to work on, I don't think that's what we need to work on first. I also wanted to say that when we go to work on accountability in city government, including the evaluation of the city manager, I wanted to throw out the idea of using an outside consultant so that counselors can be anonymous in their criticisms. We have a catch-22 situation now where counselors are afraid to give their full criticism to the manager because they're afraid that the manager will then resist their initiatives and priorities. Thank you very much, and I hope we end up with a charter that gives more power to the city council.
Thank you, Lee. We are going to Robert Winters and then Heather Hoffman.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Am I heard?
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, I don't have a whole lot to say. I mean, I can't say that I'm particularly thrilled with how open this review process has been to date. But again, much of this, of course, is due to all the COVID restrictions. I would have been much happier if there could have been a little bit more public involvement, even up to this point. One thing I want to just sort of point out is, I actually reprinted that Collier's article because I wanted everybody to sort of see the fact that when the planning charter was initiated way back when, just how many people, citizens, were actually involved in the entire movement. I would certainly, whether it's done by commission or some other process, I would hope there would be just as robust a public involvement in any future considerations. So far what I basically see is, quote, consensus of the council, and that's not really the way this should take place. I have to somewhat disagree with the characterization of the planning charter as antiquated and obsolete. It is true that it has been around for a very long time, but I think, the proof is in the pudding. I think by and large, Cambridge has actually performed extremely well by almost any measure that an objective person would care to use to take a look at how the city performs financially, and then some. So so let's not throw out the old just because it's old. Let's at least acknowledge the fact that there's been some great merit in much of that charter, even if in fact some revision may be not a bad idea. The last thing I wanted to emphasize here, perhaps in contradiction to the previous speaker, is I have a great concern about the getting the appointments, the boards and commissions, too politicized. I mean, I would hate to see a situation where basically 5 out of 9 city councilors could basically decide who gets to serve on every board and commission, because, you know, we are a city that thrives on proportional representation, which basically was created to provide a means for minority viewpoints. And I really would hate to see a situation where, you know, 5 councilors basically could run the whole show and decide everything about who gets to serve on boards and commissions. So if you want to have some kind of review of appointments in the future, I think that's not a bad idea. Or maybe if there's consensus to the tune of 7 out of 9 people rejecting somebody, perhaps. But let's think very carefully before we jump on that bandwagon. Thank you.
We will go to Heather Hoffman.
Hello, Heather Hoffman, 213 Hurley Street. First of all, I adopt what Lee Ferris said. I think her critiques are right on. And I also acknowledge that Robert Winters has been watching a long time. And I think that his skepticism is not unwarranted. The biggest problem I see in Cambridge city government is complete lack of accountability on the part of the real decision maker, because the council has become, over the last more than 30 years, so used to being told what to do by the big guy, and it's just learned helplessness. I've been pleased to see a little bit more rebellion recently, but the fact is, this city is run in order to maintain 2 goals. The first is the AAA bond rating, and the second is keeping the residential tax rate low. Everything else in this city revolves around that. And if we don't look at that, in addition to figuring out whether we want to have maybe a few other things be just as important in our city, I don't think we can think about how we want to govern ourselves. Right now, there's utter flouting of the law with no repercussions whatsoever. There's bullying left, right, and center. There is retaliation. There's intimidation and a ton of self-congratulation. What I hope we get out of this process is a real look at ourselves. What are we here for? How should we govern ourselves? And how can we make this what we say this city is? Because it currently is not. And that's a real shame. There's a ton to love about this city. I plan on living here for the rest of my life, but it's despite the city government, not because of it. Thank you.
That concludes public comment. We can close public comment at 12. It's 11:59 right now. So if there's a motion, we can do that.
So moved.
On a motion by Councilor Sabrina Wheeler to close public comment, we can do a roll call.
On that motion, Councilor Carlone.
Yes.
Yes. Vice Mayor Mallon.
Yes.
Yes. Councilor McGovern.
Yes.
Yes. Councilor Nolan.
Yes.
Yes. Councilor Simmons.
Yes.
Yes. Councilor Sabrina Wheeler.
Yes.
Yes. Councilor Toomey. Absent. Councilor Zondervan.
Yes.
Yes. Mayor Siddiqui.
Yes.
Motion passes 8 in favor, 1 absent.
So in the hour and a half that we have left, let's use this time for questions and discussion. I'll open it up to questions. Pleasure of the City Council. I have Councilor Sabrina Wheeler.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Through you to the Collins Center. Thank you so much for this presentation and the memos. They've been really helpful. And thank you to Councilor Nolan and to Mayor Siddiqui for the work getting us to this point and kicking off the process. I had 2 questions. The first was about options A and B, which were in the memo and that Michael spoke about. I would like to see us move forward with some of the straightforward changes that the memo says there's widespread agreement on among us on the City Council, like City Council confirmation for appointments, which is something that a lot of other cities have. I would really like to see us, make some of the more minor changes as soon as possible and have them on the ballot this fall if the state review says that's required, which the memo lays out as one of the options. As the memo says, the best practice is to have a charter review once every 10 years. Cambridge hasn't done a charter review in more than 80 years, so would like to see us make some of these changes, which I think are really needed. The question I had about it is that I would rather not wait to do a full charter review until 2026 if we do make some of these more straightforward changes now. So is there anything preventing us from doing small changes this year and then doing a more in-depth charter review next year? Could we, for instance, make the straightforward changes like requiring City Council appointment confirmation, and then say in the charter review, regular charter reviews will occur starting in 2022?
I don't see any reason why you couldn't, other than just the workload. Steve or Marilyn, do you have any thoughts on potential issues with that approach?
Go ahead, Marilyn. I don't see any problem.
I don't, she's on mute. I'm not sure. Oh.
Okay.
Mhm.
How does that play with into the city manager recruitment? If you start the charter process in the same year that you hire this person?
Yeah, I think that's a fair question to figure out. If you're doing both of these pieces, how do they sort of sandwich the manager? Again, is it possible? Yes. You just want to think, really think through step by step the timeline and the milestones, and recognize that who knows what other curveballs may come up. So
that makes sense. That's helpful to know. I would really like to see us move forward with these now. I think some of the straightforward changes like appointment confirmations are really needed. They're straightforward. There's widespread support on the council. And I think to that city manager question, having some of these changes in place before the city manager starts, I think would help set the tone for that new relationship between the new city manager and the council, rather than starting with our 1940 charter and then making changes. Having some changes already in place, I think would be really helpful. The other question I had was just trying to better understand the Charter Advisory Committee, which the memo talks about. I guess I'm trying to understand having an advisory committee instead of the actual city council sort of doing the charter review, and if it has to be one or the other, or if there could be some city councilors on the charter advisory committee. And then just understanding how members would be chosen. Does each councilor choose someone? Does it have to be a consensus? And then if it is a charter advisory committee rather than the council, would those meetings be recorded and open to the public as city council meetings are? Or is it more like other committees that the city has where the meetings aren't public and there's maybe some notes, but it's not as open as a council meeting is? Just trying to understand what a charter advisory committee is and how it works.
I think a lot of that would actually be up to the council's own rules and the council's own preferences. You'd be creating this body advisory to you, so you could create it how you best saw fit. Whether that included counselors or not, whether that whether they were each counselor got to select one person, or whether there was some other mechanism for choosing residents. I think there is some flexibility there. Certainly, I think you'd want, all of this group's meetings would be public meetings. So, and I think you'd want to, even go beyond that and make sure that there was as much, publicity, public input, et cetera, around them as possible. Just in terms of the committee's construction, I guess the only thing, we would say is, having worked with committees in a wide range of sizes, don't overdo it. In terms of numbers, I think 9 is a good, number. You might be able to get up to, maybe up to 11. I would not go much beyond that. It then becomes really, hard. The more people you add, the harder it becomes to move through a process. So, 7, 9, 11, probably not even 7, 9, 11, those are kind of the areas where the numbers. Marilyn or Steve, anything else to add to that?
Not for me, no.
Nope, Steve's back on mute, so.
Okay, all right. I think 9 probably is the right number for a advisory committee, and that's what the statute calls for the home rule process. And if you have a committee that is supposed to advise the council, then having council members on the committee seems to be contrary to what the committee is supposed to be doing. That's all.
It's just a quick follow-up on that, and still trying to, I guess, understand how the council would then take the recommendations of the Charter Advisory Committee and decide which ones to implement and which ones not to.
Correct. Yeah. At the end of the day, it's the council's decision, and because this will be filed as a home rule amendment, and so the committee's work would be advisory to the council, and the council could adopt it wholesale or tweak it or make major changes to it. Obviously, politically, the more major change the council makes to what's advised of it, you start, there's concerns on that front. But really, it's at the end of the day, this would be a council decision. And I think Steve makes a good point. If it is advisory to council, probably keeping it at arm's length and letting it not include counselors may be a better way to go, especially given the challenges of thinking who would be selected to be on it from the council and how would you balance that. And so I'm not saying you can't do it. You obviously could. It's just might be cleaner to make it purely non-counselors.
Okay, great. Thank you. I'll go back.
We have Councilor Nolan, Councilor McGovern, and then Vice Mayor Mallon.
Mayor Siddiqui, thank you, Mr. Ward and the whole Collins Center team. It's been really a wonderful process to finally be discussing something that I've heard about for more than a decade in Cambridge, about addressing some of the concerns people have had around our governance structure that surprises some people as they engage in it. The memos I found very helpful, number one, so I encourage anyone, I don't know if anyone's even listening, but if you haven't read them, they really do lay out, the first memo lays out some key questions. And the second one was a real interest to me to have a summary of your discussions with the full council. The areas of agreement also suggest to me that it would be wonderful for us to, from my perspective, it seems like a very doable step to take, to have some, in a way, relatively straightforward and yet meaningful and significant steps, if we can do it by this November, including addressing a couple of the areas of agreement, one of which are laid out on page 6 of your summary document and are also fleshed out a little bit more in memo number 2. I have a couple questions related to that. On the approval of appointments, I know that, for instance, the town of Amherst has that in their charter, that that this would be something possibly where the city or town, the city manager would put forth a recommendation, and then the council, there's various ways to do it. Either we have to approve, or the recommendation is made, and if we don't disapprove within a certain amount of time, it just seems like there is best practice evolving in this area. If you could tell us or give a range of a variety of cities and towns that have this in place. And I want to make a comment about the idea of these. It's as though a political appointment is a dirty word. Well, political also means responsive to the entire city. Political can mean that it's more representative, that it's more diverse, that we're actually responding to a need within the city. I think that's a positive thing. And I also believe that no matter who you are, if it's one person with 100% of the authority to make decisions, there's going to be some times in which you are not aware of some other areas that might be very important to take into account when you are appointing across the board to commissions and task forces across the city. So it's not necessarily criticism to say that this should be shared. I actually think it's a real strength and positive, and frankly, it's far more democratic. So I want to say that, and then ask if you could talk a little bit more about a range of towns and cities that do this, because it seems like that would be something we might, if we chose to go down this path, it would be helpful to have some specific practices to look at from other towns and cities.
Yeah, I'd have to kind of go through and some of our data and to get you the the specific names of which municipality does it which way. But you're exactly right about the range. On the one extreme, you could say that the council has to affirmatively approve every appointment to a board or committee. That's one end of the spectrum. On the other end of the spectrum, you could say the council can reject a board or committee appointment within a certain time frame by a supermajority, but if they don't, then the appointment is effective. And you could do it any sort of in between, in terms of majority, supermajority, in terms of the timeline and then which way you set the default. Is the default the appointment occurs unless the council vetoes it, or is the default the council has to affirmatively approve it for it to occur? I think the term you used, evolving best practice, is probably, right. I mean, I don't think there is a single, this is how it should be done. It really is up to the preferences of each individual municipality, each individual city, what feels right, what's the right balance there within that range. So that would need to be something that would be hammered out if you were pushing something like that forward this year. Steve or Marilyn, anything to add to that?
Not for me, no.
I think it's covered. But I think there has to be a timeline where if there's a confirmation process put in place, the approval or rejection has to be within, say, 45 days or whatever it is.
Yep.
So it doesn't hamstring the board or commission from having a full complement of people. And it also prevents the occurrences of holdovers that, should be either replaced or reappointed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think, and would you say, Steve and Marilyn, 30 days, 45 days, those are probably the two most common or approximately most common?
Yes.
I would say 30 or 45, but, because of, interview processes or whatever, and the council's only meeting maybe twice a month. Most councils meet twice a month. 45 is probably, a fair estimate of how long it takes.
Mm-hmm. And you can include language too, even if, you could say, unless the council shall reject and the council can sooner confirm, there are ways of playing with the language so that, if it doesn't have to take the full 45 days. If the council knows they're going to approve it, on their first meeting on day 5, they can approve it. They don't, it's only if they have that length of time to reject. And again, I think, maybe stepping back a little further on this just for a second, hopefully there wouldn't be many rejections, that the very fact of having it in place as a mechanism would lead to, so maybe more discussion, more, thinking about what the council's priorities are and whether they're being met or not by any given appointment. Because, at the end of the day, we don't want people to be put in this awkward position of, being nominated for something and rejected. But having said that, having that mechanism in place is something very common, regardless of which sort of variant it is.
Councillor Nolan?
Thank you. That was helpful. And my second question would be, there was also consensus on this question of increasing accountability in city government and strengthening mechanisms for the council to convey goals and priorities.
Mhm.
That sounds nice. However, how would that be addressed in the context of a charter? So I'm interested in if that's something I think we have, this whole council has talked about, and we're all certainly interested in. I'm trying to figure out how that would be included in a charter language such that that would happen. If you have any thoughts on that, or can send us any language that would be helpful as we contemplate this kind of change. And then one very small change that wasn't on here, but I assume if we did go forward with this, seems like we should also include gender neutral language, because our charter right now does not have that. So.
Mm-hmm. The only trick with that is because it's the Plan E text is based in the state law. I mean, I would defer to Marilyn, I guess, on how mechanically that would work, or defer to your solicitor. But certainly figuring out a way to fix that is something that would be important. As to your other question, I mean, I think the simplest one is the one that we included already, which is providing for an annual review of the manager. And just to be clear, we didn't hear from, I don't think we heard from anyone any sense that this was the fault of the manager, that there wasn't an annual review. If anything, it was more a self-reflective, we as a council need to do a better job of this. So just wanted to make that, this was not a criticism of the executive. But having said that, putting in, there shall be an annual review of the manager, and as we recently advised another place, probably spelling out the detail in ordinance would be the proper way to do it. You wouldn't want to get too far into the detail in the charter. Provide the baseline. There will be an annual review, and let the council decide the process and the pieces of it by ordinance is probably the right way. That's one way to increase the accountability. The other piece, I guess, is a little more. The other piece that comes up a lot in our discussions on charter issues is a little bit more challenging, and certainly, we hear this all over the place, regardless of the form of government. There is always council frustration, or not always, but lately there's been a lot of council frustration about budget processes and the role of the council in the budget process. And unfortunately, a lot of that is spelled out in state law where the council's role is. And so there's not a lot of opportunity at the end of the budget process really to integrate a stronger hand for the council than what already exists. Where I think there can be more language is at the beginning of the budget process and the goal setting, the priority setting, ensuring that the council has the clear responsibility and tools to do the goal setting and priority setting that it needs to do and that it wants to do. I think is something that can be, language can be worked into the charter on that. And then so those two pieces together, the review of the annual review of the manager plus the goal setting at the beginning of the budget process should create hopefully a mechanism that provides a little bit more accountability from the executive to the legislative in this form.
Councillor
Marilyn?
Nolan?
Oh, sorry. I was just gonna see if Marilyn or Steve had anything to add on that point.
No, I think that's right, that you can use the budget process to set goals, and you can also engage, the council can also engage in longer range goals and keep returning to them each year to get a sense of the progress that's made.
Counselor
The only
Nolan?
thing I,
Yep,
the only
thank
thing I,
you.
the only thing I would, sorry. The only
No,
thing I
go
would
ahead.
add is, the only thing I would add is, managers, especially in places like Cambridge, are going to want a employment agreement. And anything that's put in ordinance on performance evaluation or anything else that sets the terms and conditions of employment are going to probably be negotiated between the appointing authority and the person applying for the job. So you got to be careful about, not putting too many confinements on the ordinance, and open this process up to a serious negotiation between the municipality and the person that's applying for the job, or the candidate applying for the job. So you have to strike a real balance there, because most manager positions now have a 3 to 5 year employment agreement. So everything needs to be negotiated in that agreement.
Counselor Nolan?
Yep, thank you. To that last point, yes, it could be negotiated, but if it's in the ordinance, it means anyone who applies for the job knows exactly what the process would be, and that would be established. It certainly, having a review is something anyone should in a way want, because it helps you do your job better. But I yield. I thank you for the answers, and I would be excited to move forward with some kind of relatively universally or consensus-based changes this fall, if we can do that. Thank you, Mayor Siddiqui.
We'll go to Counselor McGovern.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Thank you to folks from the Collins Center. I do also want to thank you, Madam Mayor, and Councilor Nolan for spearheading this. I think there's a lot to talk about. And certainly I think that I would concur with my colleagues that spoke previously about, I think that there's some things that we could probably do more quickly. And I think there's a benefit to that, as Councilor Sabrina Wheeler said, in terms of, there's a difference between saying, when we're looking for a new city manager, there's a difference between saying we're going to change the structure in which committee appointments are made versus a city manager is not going to have any power and we're going to have a strong mayor. Those are two very different things in the recruitment process. And I think if we're talking about, some, I don't want to say minor, because I don't want them to feel like they're unimportant, but, those some kinds of changes around the fringes a little bit may be better to do beforehand. Couple things. I do want to caution us a little bit. We heard in public comment and we've heard from folks. I do want to caution us a little bit about highlighting some of the recent disagreements that we've had with the current city manager over, broadband or, some of the other issues that have popped up. I think there's always going to be disagreements, and I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing. And the truth is that the manager does the vast majority of what the council asks for, and we just need to be careful. This is a big change that we're talking about, and I think we just need to be careful of saying, oh, I don't like the way the current manager responded to broadband, therefore I'm going to throw the whole charter out and do something different. I think we have to be much more thoughtful than that. I actually agree with Robert Winters too, in that it's hard to talk about. I think it's hard for me to talk about making a huge change in the charter when the reality is that this is actually a pretty well-run city, a very well-run city. I think the council spends a lot of time talking about issues that other cities would love to talk about, but they're talking about how not to close schools and fire stations and lay off teachers and all these other things that we don't talk about in Cambridge because it's not an issue here. And so, although I do agree that there should be some changes, I really don't want to lose sight of the fact that even though this has been going on for 80 years, we are the envy of most other cities in this state. And as this pandemic showed, we were able to do a lot of things that other cities couldn't do because of our strong financial position, which is directly related, I think, in a lot of ways to the form of government we have. So let's just not ride this train that everything is, Cambridge is, this terrible city to live in and terribly mismanaged, and we gotta, throw it all out the door. I don't think that's accurate. I do like what Mr. Ward said about goals and reviewing the city manager, and that's on us. And I think that there are some things that we could do, make some changes that we can make on the council side that would make this process a lot better. And we should, we should make sure we do that work. A couple questions. Did you, in terms of the amount of time to review the charter, I think 80 years is probably too long to do a review, but I wonder about 10 is not a very long time. And when you're talking about, 10 years seems like a long time, but when you're talking about the fourth largest city in the Commonwealth, an economic driver of the Commonwealth, is there a difference between what sort of smaller towns, how often they review versus larger cities? I would just be afraid of, a pendulum swinging, too far in each direction every 10 years, and then we lose any kind of stability that that the city has. So is there a difference based on sort of the size of the city, or what factors come into play as to how often you would review the charter?
I don't currently see any, I can't think of any correlation with size. 10 is pretty standard. There are some that have more frequent, that are smaller. I don't think more frequent is necessary to your point, except for many places when they set up when they're making a major change, we'll set the first review 5 years out, and then all future reviews, at a 10-year interval. So for example, if you were making a major change this year, we would say, set the review for every year ending in a 6 or every year ending in a 7. That way you get you're not waiting 10 full years to be able to correct any things that you weren't quite working the way you'd hoped. But in reality, 10 years seems to be a pretty common and sensible amount. There is, what you're getting at is an important question about sort of overcorrection and, trying to, fix things at the wrong frequency. And, I think we do see many of the charter reviews that we work with, they're very thoughtful. They're usually by committees of residents appointed, and they take the job pretty seriously about, trying to figure out what can we fix without damaging anything that's working well. We do, when we work with places, we encourage, just to start with this approach of, what are the problems you're trying to solve? Let's not go through, through everything at the risk of, damaging strengths. And as you and others alluded to, Cambridge has many strengths. So, I guess the bottom line is, we would probably recommend 10 as the right frequency. If at the 10-year review, everything seemed like it was going swimmingly and smoothly, and everything was, was the way people were expecting, then you could, at that review, set it to 20 or 15 or something like that, if you wanted to set it further out. But I guess the last point I'll make in one of the reviews that has come up is the group has been reflecting a lot on how fast things are changing right now, and there was some talk: do we bring it from 10 to a shorter time frame, because technology is changing so fast, the legal environment is changing so fast, cultural norms are changing so fast. I don't think that's moving it more frequently than 10 is necessary. I think that gets to be too much. But sort of, it's interesting that you've got both of these challenges of not overdoing it, but also not waiting for it to go so far, because then if you're if it's 20 years, then you're really, again, you've got a lot of accrued time that you're trying to figure out what are we trying to fix here.
Thank you.
Councilor McGovern?
Sorry, that was a little winding.
Yeah, no. I mean, it's, I don't know what, I don't have a perfect number in mind. I just feel like 10 years goes by, you know, quickly. Um, all right, so, the other part of this, and maybe this was, I don't know if this was part of your scope or, there's so much of, so many things are intertwined with each other. And so, one of the things, we have elections every 2 years here. They're citywide. They, the difference between 8th and 9th place, the last two people to get on the council, and 10th and 11th place, the first two not to get on the council, can sometimes be 20, 30, 40 votes. Sometimes 9th and 10th is 3. And so, have you looked at, I just worry that if we were to go sort of away from a city manager form of government, I think there are some benefits to having a non-elected person running the city, because when your political career or, you getting elected can be decided by 20 votes, I think there's a potential for counselors to say, well, I want to appease these 20 people, because that may make, if I had 50 people come to me and say they want to paint the streets blue because blue is a calming color and research shows that reduces, road rage. If I could get 4 counselors to go with me, it's sort of nice to have a city manager to say, I'm not going to spend $20 million to paint the streets blue. And I worry a little bit about, so did you look at our election system and our structure and say, how does this all sort of fit together? Because I wonder if there's some potential conflict there or some potential problems there in the way we're currently elected versus, changing that system.
I think, that's a very community specific, determination of what's the right length of term, what's the right number of counselors, what's the right balance between at large and district, should there be proportional representation or not? I mean, all of those questions are really tied up, and I wouldn't, I don't think it's our place necessarily to say what the what would be best. And certainly when we talked to the council, there was all of you, or not all of you, but many of you expressed interest in looking at those questions and discussing those questions and thinking about, does the current construction of council, current composition of council, meet the needs of modern Cambridge, of Cambridge in 2021? I don't know the answer, but it's certainly a question worth discussing. Maybe the answer is it still works, and this is how we want to keep it. Or maybe the answer is no, we need some district counselors. Or maybe the answer is we need a 4-year term, or some combination thereof. As you correctly point out, they're all linked together, and linked to the larger form. But I guess it's a tough, worth discussing, but I'm not sure where it would go, where it goes.
Last question, Madam Mayor, just through you. We heard in public comment, I think from Ms. Hoffman, that I think is I agree with, in that I think over the years, the council has given a lot of its authority over to the city manager. We certainly when Manager Healy was here for 30 plus years, he was a very strong city manager. In a lot of different ways, both good and bad. I think, did you take a look at, or should we take a look at, are there things in the current charter that this council is kind of powers that the council does have and could have that they have sort of relinquished over the years, and it's now become the pattern and it's become the truth, even though maybe it's not? And are there things that we can do in the charter that, under the current charter, even if this takes a few years to make changes, I'm not saying instead of making changes, but are there some things that powers that the council has that we're not actually using, because we've just kind of gotten used to, turning those over to the manager when we don't need to?
I'll go first, but I bet Steve and Marilyn will have more to add. I guess I would say two things. One, the Plan E charter certainly is on the one end of the spectrum in terms of the balance between the executive and legislative. So to that, the answer for sort of coming out of that is, I don't think there are a lot of sort of undiscovered, or powers that are not spelled out. The Plan E charter is pretty strong for what the role of the executive is. So that's sort of one perspective. A slightly different, perspective would be, I guess, that the council does have the authority at the end of the day through the review, through doing an annual review of the manager, through the the hiring of the manager, through the setting of goals and priorities, and then holding the manager accountable through an annual process or to meeting of those and goals and priorities. So if there's a place where I think what you're getting at, the sort of council's authority is atrophied over time, that is where I think it would lie in the council's authority to set the goals and the priorities, and then to do the review that then says, how are we doing against those goals and priorities? Have they been met? If they have, then great. If they haven't, where are the areas for improvement? So those would be kind of my two responses to that question. Marilyn, and Steve, do you want to add more?
Well,
I would just add, just stepping back to the charter review process and whether it should be 7 years or 10 years. In most cases, it's 10, but we also add in, and I think this is very critical, that every 5 years that the ordinances be reviewed, because the ordinances need, to conform with the charter, and they also need to be, make sure that they're doing the same thing that they were supposed to be, that they were supposed to do when they were enacted. So I don't want to heap on a lot more work to Cambridge City Council, but every 5, maybe 7 years, all the ordinances need to be looked at and make sure they're codified correctly and make sure they're in conformance with the charter.
Councilor McGovern?
Thank you. It's all, this is all very important, and I certainly agree that there's some changes that we need to think about and look at. I'm not quite at the point of saying I want to do a complete 180, but there are certainly some things that we can do to, particularly around committees, that I think we need to do sooner rather than later. Thank you.
Vice Mayor.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, through you, and thanks to the team at the Collins Center for putting together these memos and meeting with us and being here today to have this conversation. I guess at the outset of my comments, I just wanted to say, when we talk about Cambridge being a very successful city, I think we need to really think about who is it successful for. I think certainly our Cambridge Community Foundation just put forward a report that shows that Cambridge has not been successful for a lot of our residents. So I think when we think about what lens we're using to think about success, it's important for us to think about who hasn't joined in on that success. So I think, looking at the memos and the two options that have been presented, I understand that some of my colleagues have expressed a desire to move forward very quickly with sort of what there is consensus around, and then move forward with a different process after that. I think I'm more in the camp of we should be moving forward with option A instead, for a couple of reasons. I think, we have not had a public process up to now. It has been, mostly a process within the 9 of us and the Collins Center. And having a robust public process between now and November seems very, very tight, given that, most people don't even know we're thinking about doing this. I do think also that option A fits in nicely with the city manager search that is coming up. And I like the way that the Collins Center has framed it in sort of as a dynamic opportunity for the next city manager to be involved in a charter review process and working hand in hand, especially with that public process. I think that's really, really important. the way that it's framed, where we begin this work, this current council configuration begins this work, but then the next city council gets to weigh in on the next part of the process, I think feels really good to me. Going back to what Councilor McGovern was saying, I think one of the things I know I definitely talked to the Collins Center about was length of terms, staggering the terms, maybe even changing the municipal elections to be more in alignment with the national elections, both the midterms and the presidential, just to drive that turnout. I mean, we have over 60, almost 70,000 people that are registered to vote here in Cambridge, and 20,000 of them come out and vote in a municipal election. So I think, if we're really talking about having inclusive elections, inclusive meaning more people participate and actually get to decide who is sitting at the head of their government locally, I think it's important to think about whether aligning those on the even years is something that we need to be doing. And then, of course, the appointments, I think we have seen recently that our Board of Zoning Appeals and Planning Board certainly need a better representation, and that this council really should have a responsibility and role in making sure that those two boards that are really, really important around creating and maintaining housing here in the city are more representative of the residents that they serve. So I had a couple of questions around some of the things that came forward in the recommendations. In terms of collecting public input, it seems like we have all said it needs to be a robust process. So in your experience, what has been sort of the best practice around really collecting that public input and actually engaging them on this issue, and how long does that take?
It's certainly, to be rather, I guess, blunt, it's certainly hard to engage large segments of the public in this work. We have seen places go to, pretty extreme efforts to try and generate interest, but at the end of the day, some of it can feel very esoteric and really disconnected, and and so I guess I would say, really, driving home how the charter, the structure underpins connecting it to how it's going to impact people's daily lives is very important, because everyone's so busy, even in normal times, let alone during the pandemic, and ensuring that that it doesn't feel like something that's going to be have no impact on them is important. So for one of the ones we've been doing, let me just give you an example. They've been having Zoom meetings for every twice a month for 6 months. On average, been getting a decent turnout of attendees, 20 to 30 attendees, which is we thought was pretty good for the particular municipality. But then they raised the question, should we change from manager to mayor for one meeting? That was the topic. They had advertised in advance, and 150 people showed up to weigh in. So, I think, asking some of the big questions can help drive the conversation. At the same time, if it's not actually, if they're not actually going to consider it, then that that sort of makes it a little. You don't want to go down that path. But I guess I would just say it's hard. And whatever mechanisms have worked in Cambridge locally in the past, whatever's been successful, whether that's doing meetings in different locations when meetings come back, whether it's mixing up the times of day, whether it's carving out very specific topics and sending it out to targeted lists, whatever you can do to connect it to people, how it's going to impact their daily lives, because it can feel really distant in some ways. Marilyn, Steve, you want to add anything?
I
Go ahead,
think, I
Marilyn.
think,
Sorry, I can't.
Go ahead.
okay. I think Michael has captured, the major obstacles that we have always found. A lot of communities do outreach to where there are people. They visit the Council on Aging or in public housing for seniors, because seniors are very apt to vote. They contact neighborhood organizations. They contact churches. Any place where they can sort of leave literature or be available for questions. Some communities have used, they have charter night at the public library, and people are there to answer questions. People can come in with a short speaking program, but mostly they try to focus on questions that people might have about the process. Those are some of the things that I've seen.
Yeah, it's a tough thing to get people engaged in charter discussions, because a lot of people, if they're satisfied with the way the services are being delivered, it's hard to get them to a meeting to change the form of government. And I'll just put it, bluntly. I mean, Fall River was going through a huge political turmoil. 80,000 people live there, arguably an economic engine of the South Coast, and we couldn't get more than 3 people to attend the meeting. So, I mean, just consider that. It's just the way it is in a lot of places. And granted, some communities are more engaged than others. But, when you have a city of 80,000 people and you can only get 3 people to a meeting, that's that changed their form of government amidst political turmoil. It's kind of makes you scratch your head a little bit about why people aren't more engaged in local government.
I just add one more thing. I do think, too, it's important to really engage people around the questions of what are the problems you're trying to solve through this. I think that's where you may be more likely to get people to weigh in, and whether it's conducting online surveys or paper surveys but getting people to talk about what their problems are. Once you start to getting into the solutions, it gets harder for people to follow, and B, I think people's hearts are in the right place, sometimes not always coming up with the solution that's going to solve the problem that they put forward. I guess if that's people are very good at identifying what problems they want to solve. With the complexities of municipal structures, they may not identify the optimal solutions to the problem. So, and they may be less interested in it anyway. So I think focusing the outreach, certainly at the beginning, on what are your concerns, what's not working, is the way to go.
Vice Mayor?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Through you, I think we really need to think about how to get creative around engaging the community on this process, which does feel a little abstract. I mean, I think the majority of our community doesn't realize we even have a strong city manager form of government, right? So it's really about that education piece, and part of that education piece could be around when we are doing a city manager search, really starting the education there, and but because I think what we want to avoid is that same 10 people problem that we struggle with, and Cambridge's not alone, certainly struggling with the STP problem of having the same 10 people show up. We would certainly want this to be more inclusive than that. My other question was around the advisory committee. Your memo suggests that we should be looking for folks that have prior civil service experience. Can you explain that a little bit? Why you think that's important? Does it need to be all 9 folks have prior civil service and experience, or if it just needs to be a part of what we are looking for?
Let me just make sure I'm looking at the.
It's on the potential last steps, the 3rd paragraph. Says ensure the committee has individuals who have a good understanding of the community and its government, who represent different age groups, races, neighborhoods, etc., and who have prior civil service, which could be either in the governmental or nonprofit realms.
And that was supposed to be civic.
Does it say
Sorry,
civil?
I didn't, did I say civil? I meant civic.
Yeah, okay.
That would be wild. Civic service.
Yeah, I think sort of going back to what I was saying before, these are really complex problems. And so having people on there who have some experience, direct experience working in the environment or an environment like, a public sector or nonprofit sector environment that has some similarities will make it, I think, easier to draw linkages between the problems you're trying to solve and what the solutions might be to those problems. You certainly see a lot of, through various charter reviews, you see a lot of people with, again, really solid ideas of what the problems they're trying to solve are, and they're good. They're right. They're right about the problems, but the solutions they come up with, may either not solve the problem or make it worse or introduce other problems that they weren't expecting. And so having some experience on the committee that's doing that work, I think would be very, very important. Again, it doesn't have to be everyone. In fact, you probably don't want it to be everyone, but you want to have some of those voices who can say, well, I hear why you want to try that, but from my experience working in X place, here's why I think that's not the best solution, something along those lines.
Okay, thank
Marilyn,
you.
I think Marilyn, you had helped draft that piece. Do you want any more to add there?
Yes, I in my experience, it's often people that have previously served on a board or commission, or previously served as a counselor, or maybe served as a manager in another community, just to get that sense of the rhythm of how government works. Not that it can't be changed, but people who've had experience, might be able to identify, as Mike said, issues that would present obstacles or make it difficult.
Okay, that's helpful. I just wanted to make sure it wasn't like all 9 people need to have some form of civic service background. So those were really my questions. I will yield the floor at this time, but thanks again for being here and for your work.
Councilor Carlone.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and thanks to the Collins Center. I'm sure we all greatly appreciate the fact that you've structured what we can do, what we can't do at this time, and different time options as far as implementation. So a couple of things that struck me, and I'm trying not to repeat my colleagues' comments, is the first one about goals, the council goals. Let's face it, that's the most critical thing that we establish. Yes, we might have policy orders that go into a different direction. I can tell you in the past, we were asked not to make things, previous manager, not to make our goals too specific. And a number of us feel we have to make them more specific or they don't mean anything. And the reason I'm saying that is years past when I was a consultant, the goals were so general, any budget would be reflecting the goals. So your thoughts on that, and to be more specific, the budget was supposed to tell us how much money went into each of the 12 goals. And this is the second year that we've asked for that, and it's not been that case. It's been selected goals by the management team. So how can we strengthen that? I mean, that to me is the biggest thing that establishes the budget, which everything then is based on. So is this in the contract? Is this I mean, it seems like the only other option is we reject a budget. And, short term, yeah, maybe. Long term, that's a disaster. It seems like a terrible alternative. Is that something that would be in the contract with a new manager to make it more specific? It seems to me that's the relationship, is this is what we offer, this is what we expect. Am I off base there?
Well, I think in the contract, I think, again, also putting something in the charter about a required annual review and then tying that to the details spelled out in ordinance and then separately in the contract, building off the ordinances, so that it's a clear process. And I think that will help the council. It'll also help the manager the next manager to understand what the expectations are, and provide a pathway. Here's what I need to do to meet them, to satisfy the council, and to that I'm doing an excellent job. So I think yes to the contract, yes to the ordinances, yes to something in the charter to hang all of that on. I think that's all important. Obviously, the goal setting itself, as you alluded to at the beginning, is critical. We know, we see over and over, goal setting is hard, particularly for committees to set goals. It's not something that's easy to do, but it is something that is very important. And we see a lot of places, unfortunately, struggling and not doing as well as they would hope, which then does have ripple effects down in, as you're saying, to frustrations further downstream, when you're saying, how come this wasn't wasn't in the budget? Well, was it clearly, spelled out in the goals? Well, our goal setting process was, so it all, does kind of tie together, I think. But contract, ordinances, charter, and also spelling it out in the recruitment. There will be opportunities throughout the recruitment process, I think, whether it's through the job description or the interview process, both in the attracting of candidates and in the vetting and selecting of candidates, to kind of rebuild potentially, or build a new relationship between the next council and the next manager, whoever he or she may be.
Didn't Marilyn want to add something? I guess not. I want to be clear. I might feel differently than other councilors. Our manager has been more open on the budget than previous managers. But my second question relates to something similar, but in a different direction, and that is the boards. It seems to me that one of the things that wasn't mentioned that we need to do is be a part of what we want in the boards. The manager has a letter or a statement of the kind of people we want on different boards. Well, we have to be part of that description. We have to add our comments, making sure neighborhoods are better represented, making sure it's somebody that understands planning and the importance of it, understands development or whatever. And there are a lot of good people on our boards. And I love many people on the planning board, but we seem to approve almost every project on the planning board. And, when something isn't right if every project gets approved. And just like if you rejected every project, something isn't right. There are very little modifications at certain boards to any project. And then you wonder, what is this other than a processional event as opposed to a critically important event? So I think somewhere along the line, we have to, as a board, as a council, have our input. So then the people who do come before us on the boards for an interview, they know what we're after, and it isn't like yes, no, it can be evaluated more. Do other cities do that? I assume they do.
I can't think in the charter where they do, but there are certainly other ways in other places. Marilyn, do you have any, while I'm thinking of this, anything that jumps to your mind?
Not off the top of my head, no.
Well-
I guess, where it would eventually lie is again back at the council's, goal setting, including in those goals, the, defining what you're looking for in the planning board appointments. Also, maybe connecting it back. I know several years ago, I think several councilors mentioned there was a larger visioning process or strategic planning process. So, potentially pulling, using that as the foundation for, the pieces of description of what you're looking for in planning board or zoning board or other board appointees could be put there. And I mean, I suppose even by ordinance, you could, or not, maybe not ordinance, but a resolution, talk about the priorities, the characteristics you're looking for, et cetera.
We did include in the Framingham Charter sort of a direction to the mayor to make appointments taking into consideration geography, demography, and possibly their prior civic association. And it's kind of an aspirational statement as far as it's because it can't really be enforced, but it was there as a standard.
That's a good point. And that also reminds me, Amherst also tried an experiment, and it's so new, it's hard to say, how, whether it's, how well it's working or what the problems are with it yet. But they created a residents advisory committee that the town manager would select a group of residents to help recruit, vet, and select board and committee members. And the charter says that they're supposed to look for experience, expertise, but also seek out a diversity of people and voices, or I forget how they put it. So you could include something like that. I think you'd have to be very careful about how such a committee was constructed, but that would be another way to do it.
That sounds very interesting and very representational. I like that. Related to that, some places give a stipend. The planning board and puts an enormous amount of time in. 3 meetings a month.
Mhm.
Probably, if you add up all the hours, each of those are 7 to 8 hours, including prep for each meeting. Some places give a stipend to the planning board, and in my mind, it might attract some urban design consultants to participate. If you're familiar with that, what are the negatives about that? Does that remove, once you start paying someone, does that remove anything from the council as far as zoning goes? Zoning approval?
I'm not sure I have much on that. Marilyn, do you have anything?
Well, the stipend doesn't affect the council's statutory responsibility.
Okay.
In terms of zoning.
Thank you. Someone told me they thought it did, and that's why I'm asking. Thank you very much for everything you're doing. It's greatly appreciated.
So we have a little under half an hour left. Other counselors who haven't spoken on this matter? Counselor Zondervan.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, through you. My thanks to Collins Center as well for these memos and recommendations and thoughtful consideration. I really struggle with this whole question because I don't necessarily feel like we have a charter problem. for the most part. I mean, you know, you mentioned earlier, Mike, that the manager would need a contract, and that's of course not required, and it's not spelled out in the charter as far as I understand. But having a multi-year contract does, in my opinion, reduce the opportunity for accountability, because it makes it a more difficult decision for the council to let go of a manager, because they would still owe them a lot of money under the contract. So it strikes me that those are some of the deeper problems, and that, you know, the difference between one charter or the other isn't really what's going to make the difference. In terms of goals, we did the envision process, and it actually, I think, did a great job of sourcing our community goals and laying them out. And so we have that already in front of us, but there seems to be very little appetite to actually act on them from the executive side. And so, again, we're kind of stuck in this, you know, debate where these are the goals, and we want the executive to act on them, and we're not seeing enough action that we want to see. So I guess my question for you is, you know, is around this contract. Is that, I mean, again, I don't believe that's required, but you seem to indicate that you pretty much have to do that, because otherwise you wouldn't be able to attract any talent. Is that the idea?
I think it's pretty standard now that managers have contracts, negotiate contracts for employment. Marilyn, do you have more on that?
Well, it's a state statute that allows communities to enter into contracts for the manager.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess, and most of them do. That's certainly my sense.
Yeah, I mean, I get what, you know, there's sort of, you know, I guess there's challenges on either side here, right? Of wanting to ensure that the council has the strength and the ability to remove the manager if the manager is not living up to the council's expectations and not meeting, you know, what's been expected. At the same time, you know, it needs to be, you know, to attract the person you want to attract, you have to have enough protections in place and enough, you know, enough there that they're not going to feel like they're going to be tossed out, you know, from their perspective on a whim. So you know, there's sort of problem on either end there, and it's kind of how do you thread the needle in providing the appropriate accountability without making it so making the balance so far off that folks say this is not worth, you know, I'm not going to uproot myself, move, you know, across the state, across the country, whatever. If you know, a year in, I'm going to be tossed out because I didn't do X or Y or Z fast enough. Does that get at what you were asking about?
Councilor Zondervan?
Yeah, I mean, thank you. It's that, again, the statute allows it, but it's not required. Having served as a chief executive myself in the private sector, you know, there's no job guarantee, right? So, you know, this kind of expectation that somehow that should be the case here, I just find that very strange, to be honest with you, and I think it is very disempowering for the council, because it just creates this very you know, reluctance to change managers, and we essentially haven't done so in 40 years, which is astonishing. My other concern, I guess, is that, you know, I really think ultimately the question of what charter, what kind of government we should have belongs to the people. And you mentioned that in your option C, where the people can at any time essentially initiate the charter review process. And that also gets at the engagement issue, because if the people are initiating the process, then they're engaged by definition. If the council is doing it, it's like we're trying to pull them into this conversation, but for the most part, as you've laid out, they may not be that interested, because how does it really affect them in the end? So I do feel like it would be more appropriate for the people to ultimately make this call rather than for the council to do that. But it does seem like there's some opportunity to make some tweaks, if you will, or some relatively smaller changes that might make sense and improve things. Although, again, there's always the question of unintended consequences, and is there really ultimately an optimal solution, or are we just shuffling things around on the deck? So I guess I'm really skeptical, but I do appreciate all the work and all the knowledge that you've provided us. That is really helpful. So thank you for that.
Anyone else? Councillor Simmons? I don't see her.
Sorry.
Anything from you?
No, Madam Mayor. I mean, I thank you very much for this discussion. A lot of the things I've already heard mentioned by the Collins Center and by my colleagues, I would certainly agree with. I think there is, although the council rightfully so is very interested in charter review, a good number of citizens have the attitude that ain't broke, don't fix it, or they don't understand it. And to have this conversation and not engage the community in some way would be unfortunate. So do we want to make some changes? I think anything is important to change in some way or to review. And the fact that we have not reviewed our charter in the very 8 decades, says yes, we should have charter review. We should institutionalize it in some way. So I'd be very much in support of that. There were some things on there about access to legal services that we talked about. I don't have any keen interest in that at all. And I have some concerns about where I understand where the discussion about having more control about appointments is important, because there are few, I think someone mentioned, may have been the vice mayor, about some of our boards and commissions having some bad actors, for lack of a better way of saying it, still serving, and how that continues to happen. And if the council has more of a role, I don't know how that exactly rolls out, would that be helpful? I'm certainly interested in having that discussion. And I do think to some degree we might want to make some, we want to do something, but what that is and how we involve the community, I think still is a bit of an uphill climb, because I think the reason why our voting numbers are low, with a population of registered voters that is far greater than the people that turn out, because the good number of people are just satisfied with how the city runs, and they don't feel the need to exercise their right to vote more aggressively because they're not happy. And then of course there's the student population that does have represent a large number of people that are in our city. So I'll be interested in seeing how this goes down the road. There was something that the gentleman from the Collins Center, what's his name? Mr. Ward mentioned, or one of his cohorts mentioned about, there was I think someone said, well, can this process be held by the committee of a whole? And I appreciate his return response, which is, I know everybody wants to be in the making of the soup, but maybe it's not the great thing to do. And I would agree. I think it as interested as we want to be and as hands-on as we want to be, I think we should take a different approach. And it's written, I can't remember exactly which one of the approaches that he has, which says you have a charter commission or advisory committee that does the work and reports back to you. trying to get the council totally engaged, as nice as that may sound, I think may be somewhat cumbersome. So again, I think it's something that we're going to have more conversation about. I think it's good that we're having this conversation. I hope we stay the course and make it happen, because some part of this is a little bit like deja vu. I've sat through this discussion 2 or 3 times. The council tried to just bring it to the State House, I would say maybe about a decade ago, about the whole idea of a strong mayor, and we couldn't get it to happen. So I hope this time the council can move this conversation in earnest and do make, at the minimum, a commitment to having a annual charter review through some process. So with that, I'm going to yield the floor and thank the Collins Center for their presentation and information that they've provided with us. Thank you. I yield the floor.
I see Councilor Sabrina Wheeler and then Vice Mayor Mallon.
Okay, Madam Mayor, I had one quick additional follow-up question, and that it was in the memo for both options A and B. It talked about the council doing a home rule petition for this, which would have to be approved by the legislature and the governor. I just wanted to clarify, because I think folks in the community and on the council are used to, a lot of times we send home rule petitions, they aren't acted on, or it takes a while for them to be, but that this is a separate home rule petition process, and that, you know, most times that cities do special acts, they get, if they're, you know, approved by the council, they get acted on, you know, relatively quickly by the legislature and the governor. Is that correct? It's not like other home rule petitions where they might, you know, not actually get acted on?
It could be. It's really tough to say, given, you know, from one legislature to the next. I know I've already had conversations with some staff from the Committee on Municipalities and Regional Governments, and for not this project, for other projects, let them know that there is a bunch of home rule petitions likely coming their way in the next month or so that are going to need to be acted on, you know, or, well, not going to be, that the communities would like them to act on quickly so that they could get on the ballot in November. So I'm hoping to hear back from them at some point soon about what the hard deadline is for when they would need something filed. But I haven't heard yet on that. So it's, you know, the window for this year is tight, you know, to have a chance at it. You know, I think you're talking, you know, probably needing it done in July in order to get it back in time. But I can't, you know, there's too much variability with the legislature to, you know, to be able to answer that, I think, succinctly. I know Marilyn has, having lots of experience with this, anything further on that?
I don't think so. Councilor Sabrina Wheeler?
Thanks. Yeah, and just to the point that a couple of my colleagues raised about community engagement and input, I think it is a really good one. I just wanted to make clear it was in the memo, and that, you know, any substantial changes that the council made would have to be approved by the voters. And so there is a citywide approval process. That's where that people could engage on. There could be campaigns, you know, in favor or against things. And so there is a really robust process around that. And that in starting these changes, we should absolutely, you know, try to have a community engagement around it. And, you know, if we can get a couple dozen people to come in, that might be the best. That often happens, as we heard, or if we're lucky, a couple hundred. But that the other part of this is that, you know, by starting this as the council, folks have weighed in about how they feel about city government by voting for us, about, you know, if they want change, if they, you know, want change on certain things. They might not have a specific idea of where every councilor stands on every charter review item, but folks do understand from talking to us about, you know, what our thoughts are around city government, and that in some ways that's the most robust process we could have, right? I hear the point about we could have more turnout for city council elections, but we had 22,000 people weigh in at the last city council elections, so 22,000 voters had a say about, you know, us on the council. So I would like to see us move forward with some of the straightforward changes, like council improvement for appointments this year, if we can, and then have a more robust conversation around charter review in 2022 and 2023.
Vice Mayor Mallon and then Councilor Nolan.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So I guess my question is, functionally, how do we move forward from here with option A or option B? Does it get put to a vote at the city council meeting? I think I'm hearing some different things from different colleagues. It doesn't seem like there's a straight consensus on which option to go with, but there might be a majority of one versus the other. So I guess just functionally, I'm wondering what the next step is.
Yeah, I was going to get to that after I heard from Councilor Nolan.
Okay, then I'll yield back to my colleague.
Councilor Nolan?
Thank you, Mayor Siddiqui. Just a couple quick points. I did want to understand, my understanding is even if we did something that we just approve appointments, that would eventually go to a vote of the voters. That was in the memo that there are, if you were just changing in essence a typo or changing a he to she or them or he, that might not have to go to the voters. The legislature could just approve it on a home rule, but that this, even a relatively straightforward, relatively simple thing like saying we now have to approve appointments as opposed to just get notified of them, that would be good to confirm that. So there would have to be the public weighing in and education. Then the other point is there was some talk, which I completely agree with. I believe the Vice Mayor raised the question of having our elections on, an example would be our elections on a state and even years. My understanding from prior communication with the Collins Center is it's either actually in the state law that cannot happen, or that the state legislature never approves that because they actually believe it ends up having an election day that is too complex and that has too many things on the ballot. So while that's something I'm interested in, I heard recently that the state legislature is actually looking at it because we're not the only municipality who would think it would be great if these elections, our municipal elections, were at the same day and the same time in order to increase turnout dramatically. But where is that in the process? Is that because that, if the state would not allow that, that's not something that we could consider now.
Would you like me to? From my understanding is it is, while probably technically allowed, it is extremely, frowned upon, and you could get away with it maybe for a special election for a particular, for the charter, for a debt exclusion or something like that, if there were specific circumstances. But I think you would run into huge opposition trying to put the regular council election on the same day as the state and federal, as it is now. As you're alluding to, there may be some talk going on about making it possible to do that. But right now, my understanding, the way, and I would defer to your clerk on this, but my understanding is, when on those rare occasions when there are municipal elections the same day as state and federal, it requires 2 sets of ballots, 2 sets of poll of check-ins, 2 sets of machines, because there's no current mechanism to have a single ballot that would have state, federal, and local. Is that, I don't know, either the clerk or Marilyn or someone else want to double check my fact there?
Madam Mayor.
Go ahead, Solicitor.
Thank you. I just wanted, Mr. Ward may not be aware of this, but in Cambridge, the elections are handled by the Election Commission as opposed to the city clerk. So I think that it would be something we could ask the Election Commission if you wanted to get any guidance on that.
Well, did anyone else wanted to add to Councilor Nolan? So I'm looking at the time, it's 1:23. As far as next steps, I think I've heard a few different things. I've heard some folks not really say which option from the memo they'd prefer. I've had some folks say that they would like to make some changes before November. And then I've heard a little bit of perhaps, go the option A route. And so anything we do, we have to take a vote on what direction we decide in a public forum. And so I'll ask this to the city solicitor, would it make sense to, if we want to have next steps on this, does it go through a policy order system to get some consensus? Or do we have another follow-up meeting to take a vote on which option the council, a special meeting to take a vote on which option the city council would take?
Through you, Madam Mayor, I think that the council could put in a motion to be submitted to the full council with this committee report, asking to vote on whether the council wishes to pursue either option A or option B, or you could have a special meeting. I think you could do either. I think that before proceeding, it would be, for example, the special act, there were some questions raised about that. So once you've decided on which way you want to go, there may be some other legal questions that arise that we'd be happy to give guidance on. But I think that as far as the council deciding the next step, it's really more of a question of whether you wanted to have more process that involved the public, like another committee meeting, or just send it back to the council for a vote, or to have a special meeting.
Madam Mayor,
Go ahead, clerk.
just through you, and I just want to confirm with the Solicitor Flower, this is a special meeting of the City Council, not a committee meeting. So I'm just confirming that any vote taken today would become effective immediately. Is that correct?
Thank you, Mr. Clerk and Madam Mayor. I had forgotten that. So yes, votes could be taken today to move forward in a particular direction.
So what's the pleasure of the city council? Do we want a little bit more time to think about this, or can we take a up and down vote on option A or option B, or some kind of hybrid?
Madam Mayor?
Yeah, go ahead, Councilor Sabrina Wheeler.
I'd be happy to draft up some language about some of the more straightforward changes that were listed in the memo, and submit to a council meeting, and we could take an up or down vote on some of those changes.
Madam Mayor.
Vice Mayor.
I'm sorry, I missed almost all of that. I think Councilor Sabrina Wheeler's volume is not up very high. If he could just please repeat that.
Councilor Sabrina Wheeler.
Sorry, apologies. Yeah, I was saying I would be happy to draft up a policy order with some of the more straightforward changes, like city council approval for appointments and doing a regular charter review every 10 years, and submit that for a council meeting that we could then discuss and vote on.
Councilor Nolan.
Yeah, I would be happy to move forward. I'm not sure if right now at this meeting, if we voted on option A or B, they're not clear about what would be included, for instance, in option B. So I don't think we're ready, or at least I'm ready to move forward right now. I am interested in that. I agree, as I said earlier, and several of us said, there may be a way to have a clear, specific, limited moving forward for this November, but then a timeline for more expansive review. And I'm happy to do it as part of a regular meeting, or for you, Mayor Siddiqui, to call another special meeting, recognizing that if we were to do it, we would have to do it, in the next few weeks in order for this to be in process. So partly it depends on what the rest of the council, if, our agendas do get kind of jam-packed. So we could discuss it at a regular meeting or having another special meeting. If we did that, I would try to find an evening meeting so that there would be more ability of the public to perhaps attend, but I could go either way depending on what the rest of my colleagues feel is most appropriate.
So yeah, I mean, I could call another special meeting that kind of lays out a little bit more detail from what I've heard tonight, on a potential path, or Councilor Sabrina, I could work with Councilor Sabrina Wheeler on bringing something to the council. We don't have that many regular meetings left for Monday nights. So we also have, a good amount of ordinance meetings coming up. So the schedule will be the hard thing to work with. So yeah, I think either of those options would make the most sense. But again, because there's not, I think what's a little bit unclear is, I think some have said the option that they prefer And some have said, a little bit of specifics of what they prefer. And some have said, it hasn't been an opinion either way. I think so. I think we have some things to consider. So I think we'll either call another special meeting, or we can. I can try to come up with something with Councilor Sabrina Wheeler based on the memos that we have. Councilor Nolan?
Yeah, and I would definitely like to be involved in that.
Absolutely.
You and I were involved from the beginning.
Yeah,
If we move forward, and I don't know if we can do a kind of poll of members about which one they prefer, either another special meeting if we can find the time, or to have this appear on a regular meeting, because I want to be responsive to our colleagues.
Yeah, absolutely. And Councilor Nolan is the one who got all of this started. So obviously, you need to can be the lead. Vice Mayor?
Oh, thank you, Madam Mayor. I just want to be clear that I would be amenable to option B as long as we could move up the timeline for a fuller review from 2026 and move that forward. I think the Collins Center has made it clear that we could even do that next year, which I think is probably a little too soon. But I just want to be clear that I'm not opposed to option B as long as we can move that timeline and pull it forward.
Okay. So looking at the time, I think it's best that we adjourn. And so I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
So on a motion by Vice Mayor to adjourn.
On that motion, Councilor Carlone.
Yes.
Yes. Vice Mayor Mallon.
Yes.
Yes. Councilor McGovern.
Yes.
Yes. Councilor Nolan.
Yes.
Yes. Councilor Simmons. Councilor Simmons. Absent. Councilor Sabrina Wheeler.
Yes.
Yes. Councilor Toomey. Absent. Councilor Zondervan.
Yes.
Yes. Mayor Siddiqui.
Yes.
Motion passes 7 in favor, 2 absent.
Thank you.
Thank you. See some of you at NLTP in half an hour.
There you go.
Take care.